The air between us felt like it could tear. I stood under the narrow gap between the maple trees, their rust-colored leaves fluttering above, and he was just inches from me, his eyes locking on mine like neither of us remembered how we got here. The wind carried the scent of cut grass and fading summer. Somewhere behind me, the screen door of my house creaked, reminding me that I wasn't alone, not in this yard, not in this life. He stepped forward. Not touching. Just closer. For a second, the world narrowed to the space between his breath and mine. I could hear my heart knocking in my ears. Then a sound, not loud but sharp, tore through everything. The screech of a porch chair dragging. My porch. My house. He didn't flinch. I did. And just like that, I stepped back. Everything that happened before that moment, and everything that came after, began with silence and a pair of roller skates. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? The 4th of July decorations were still clinging to our porch railings, limp and half-torn from last week's storm. It was the kind of quiet Ohio afternoon where even the air seemed to be resting. The only sound was the distant thrum of a lawnmower, his lawnmower, a few doors down but just close enough to be unmistakable. I came back from Kroger with a bag full of things we didn't need. Peaches too soft, yogurt he never ate, sparkling water I'd quit drinking months ago. I stood by the car a moment longer than needed, watching him push the mower with easy rhythm, his shirt tucked into his back pocket, skin sun-warmed and unaware. My husband didn't come out. Inside, he was stretched out in his recliner, the TV flickering with baseball. The room smelled faintly of beer and leftover chips. The same scent every Saturday. He barely looked up. "Did you remember the ice?" he asked without looking away from the screen. I didn't answer. I set the groceries down louder than necessary and went to the kitchen. 3 hours later, he was asleep in the same position. His phone buzzed twice, once with a calendar reminder, once with a message from his brother. He didn't stir. I stared at him. Not with anger. Not with resentment. Just with absence. The next morning, I dug out my old roller skates from the hall closet. Dusty but intact, like something left behind from a younger version of me who still liked moving forward fast. The park was nearly empty. A few teens on bikes, a couple walking a golden retriever. I moved slow at first, my balance rusty. Then the wind caught me and I let it carry me, just for a minute. Just long enough to pretend. The fall wasn't dramatic. No yelling, no broken bones. Just a hard skid, a twist of the ankle, a thud that knocked the air out of my lungs. "Are you okay?" His voice, not a question, a decision. He was already at my side, having crossed the park quicker than I thought possible. I blinked up at him, sunlight behind his head. "I think so," I said, not believing it. He helped me sit up, then insisted, not asked, that he walk me home. The path was short, but every step pulsed through my ankle like a warning bell. The house was still. My husband was gone, probably at the gas station he liked to linger in, chatting with the cashier he thought was funny. "You should sit," he said once we got inside. I did. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen until I offered coffee. It felt strange, the neighbor whose name I barely used standing near my cabinets, waiting for a mug. We didn't talk much. Just sipped slowly. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was something else. When he left, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, staring at the dent his cup had left in the napkin. That evening, I told my husband I'd taken a fall. He looked at me, grinned. "You're not 20 anymore," he said, then chuckled and returned to ESPN. The next morning, I watered the flowers. I watched the neighbor fixing the broken fence between our yards. Bent nails, old wood. The space had been there for months. He nodded at me. I nodded back. I brought over lemonade around noon. He said thank you. We stood there awkwardly until I mentioned the weather, then the fence, then nothing at all. But the silence stretched thinner than before. You used to skate a lot, he finally asked. Back when my knees didn't creak, I smiled. He laughed. I get that. We didn't say anything else for a while. I left the empty glass on his porch. That night, I found myself awake at 2:07 a.m., staring out the window. His house was dark, but the blinds shifted slightly. Like someone was standing just out of view. The next Sunday, I baked, something I hadn't done in months. Banana bread, the way my mother used to. I told myself it was for us. But when it was done, I wrapped a still warm slice and walked it across the lawn. He answered before I knocked. Smells amazing, he said, accepting the foil-wrapped gift like it was priceless. I didn't go inside. Just stood there in the afternoon sun while he leaned against the doorframe. I don't know why I made it, I said. I do. I almost asked him what he meant, but didn't. Instead, I smiled, not politely. That night, as I sat on the porch rubbing my ankle, my phone buzzed. Just one message. If you need help again, you know where I am. I stared at it too long. So long that I didn't notice my husband behind me until he cleared his throat. He held out the phone to me, screen still glowing. I think this is yours, he said flatly. Then he walked back inside without another word. And just like that, everything I thought I was hiding stopped being hidden. He handed me my phone, then walked back inside like it was just any other night. No raised voice. No accusations. No passive-aggressive remarks. Just a silent gesture and the sound of the screen door creaking shut behind him. I stared at the message still glowing on the screen. Just one line, if you need help again, you know where I am. It wasn't a confession. Wasn't even flirtation. But it was something. Something he read. The next morning, I went out early, before the heat thickened. My ankle still ached slightly as I stepped into the driveway, but I made it to the car. I drove past our usual grocery store and kept going, ending up at the farmer's market by the county library. The place buzzed with energy. Retired couples sampling jam. Teenagers selling local honey. Accordion music leaking from a corner speaker. I needed the noise. Something to drown out the silence in my kitchen. I didn't expect to see him. But there he was. 2 rows over, looking at tomatoes. He didn't notice me at first. I stood behind a table of peaches, half shielded by an umbrella. My hands shook slightly as I reached for one. It dropped. Rolled. Stopped by the edge of his sneaker. He looked down. Then up. No smile. Just recognition. He handed me the peach and said, "You okay?" I nodded. Said nothing else. We didn't speak again until I was checking out. He appeared behind me as I was juggling a dozen eggs and a bag of squash. "Let me help you carry those to your car." It wasn't a question. I let him. We walked in silence. Only when he placed the bags in the trunk did I finally look at him directly. "Coffee?" He hesitated. Then nodded once. "There's a little cafe near the lake, one of those places with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus that change too often." We sat by the window. I ordered black coffee I didn't want. He asked for tea. I talked about the ankle. The weather. He listened without responding, until I ran out of filler. "I think I forgot who I was somewhere along the way," I said. He didn't answer right away. "Then, you didn't forget." You just went quiet. The words hung in the air longer than the steam from our mugs. Back home, I parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest. I told myself I needed the steps. But really, I just didn't want to be seen coming home with 2 cups in hand. When I stepped inside, the TV was still on. My husband was on the couch. Same recliner. Same posture. He glanced up. Long walk? Yeah. He nodded. His eyes already back on the screen. That evening, I sat on the porch again. Not to think. Just to exist. The neighbor's lights were off. Windows dark. I closed my eyes. And that's when I heard it. Not a voice. Not footsteps. Just the soft creak of his gate. A sound I'd only recognized because I'd heard it so many times before without listening. I opened my eyes. No one there. But I knew. The next afternoon, I told myself I needed fresh air. I took the sidewalk route around the block. Just enough time to pass his yard without looking like I intended to. He was outside, watering a line of plants by his fence. His head turned before I reached the end of the block. You walkin' the ghost again, he said lightly. I stopped. Smiled. Trying to keep her in shape. He motioned to the side yard, behind the old shed, where the trees hung low and the grass grew wild. I followed without speaking. We sat down on overturned crates. The air was cooler there, shaded. I could hear lawn sprinklers clicking nearby and a distant dog barking. I don't think I know what I'm doing anymore, I said. You don't have to. I looked at him. He didn't look away. We kissed. I stood up faster than I meant to. My breath uneven. I didn't say goodbye. Just turned and walked home, cutting through backyards like a teenager sneaking in after curfew. At dinner, my husband asked, "You still thinking about getting a dog again?" I stared at my plate. Maybe. He nodded. Didn't push. He never pushed. Later that night, when I sat down to read, my phone buzzed again. It was him. A single photo. The 2 of us. Blurred. Grainy. Caught in the shadows behind his shed. Then another message, deleted it. Just thought you should know it existed. I stared at the screen. There was a camera above the shed. One I'd never noticed. Security, probably. Motion sensitive. Standard, nothing strange. But he could have saved it. Used it. Said something. He didn't. He just wanted me to know it was real. And gone. The next morning, I watched my husband butter his toast. Same hands. Same movements. Same pace he'd had for years. I stared at him long enough that he looked up. You okay? He asked. Yeah. He nodded. But my hands were shaking again. Not from guilt. Not from fear. From knowing I wasn't sure which part of my life was still mine. And which part I'd already given away. The coffee mug sat untouched beside my book. My eyes moved across the same sentence over and over again, but my mind never absorbed it. Morning light filtered through the blinds, cutting the living room in sharp slices of gold and shadow. The neighborhood barbecue was today. Everyone went. Everyone except him. He never liked events like that. Too much noise. Too many faces to remember. Too much small talk. So he stayed home, told me to go without him, said he'd watch the game. I said I might not stay long. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years, one that still fit but now hung differently. My reflection in the mirror didn't lie, but it didn't say everything either. Outside, the hum of music and clinking of beer bottles carried through the warm air. The scent of grilled meat and overcooked corn drifted toward our porch. I walked over slowly, plate of brownies in hand. There were already too many desserts on the table. I set mine down anyway. The neighbor was at the grill, wearing sunglasses and a relaxed look I hadn't seen before. He was talking to someone, one of the new couples that had moved in down the street. He flipped burgers with one hand and sipped iced tea with the other, as if everything in the world was perfectly simple. He caught my glance once, for barely half a second, then turned back to the grill. I grabbed a soda and sat near the edge of the gathering, avoiding conversation. The usual group talked politics. Someone brought up local taxes. Someone else complained about the high school football coach. I was there. But I wasn't. Time passed strangely. An hour felt like 10 minutes, and 10 minutes felt like an hour. At some point, he wandered over to the cooler beside me. Bent down, grabbed a bottle, said quietly without looking, "Didn't think you'd show." "I live here," I answered. He smiled, then walked away without another word. That night, after everyone had gone, I slipped out with a dish towel in my hand, an excuse. I told myself I was returning a platter someone had borrowed, even though I could have just left it on their porch. I walked around to the side of his house. The porch light was off, but the kitchen light was glowing faintly. I didn't knock. Before I could even reach the steps, the door opened. He stood there in a plain t-shirt, barefoot, holding nothing. His eyes met mine, and neither of us moved. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. It just was. Inside, his living room was dim. A small lamp near the record player cast a soft circle of light across the floor. A vinyl spun quietly, Fleetwood Mac, I think. Rumors. A song I hadn't heard in years played like it had never stopped. We sat on the floor. I hugged my knees. He sat cross-legged, a few feet away. We didn't speak for several long minutes. "I'm not who I used to be," I said quietly. "None of us are. My husband hasn't looked at me in months." He nodded. "I think I miss being wanted more than I miss being loved," I said. There was no judgment in his eyes. No advice. Just the silence of someone who wasn't afraid to sit with truth. When I stood up to leave, he reached for my hand. We kissed. I left right after. Through the side door. Cutting across the lawn barefoot. My heart felt louder than my steps. Back home, the porch light was still on. I walked quietly through the front door. My shoes dangled from my fingers. I found him in the living room. The TV was off. No sports game. No half-empty bottle. Just him, sitting in the armchair, staring at the blank screen. On the coffee table, a dusty VHS tape and the old wedding video cover, the one we hadn't touched in years. The image of us younger, smaller, frozen in time. He didn't notice me at first. I watched him for a while. His hands rested on his knees. His posture too straight, like someone who didn't know how to sit comfortably anymore. The silence was so thick I almost said something, anything. But then I saw it. The remote. Lying cracked on the floor. Not dropped. Snapped. Not in two, but with pressure. One side bent inward unnaturally, the rubber buttons slightly dislodged. Not a factory defect. Not an accident. I looked back at him. His eyes were still fixed on the screen like he hadn't blinked in minutes. Neither of us spoke. Eventually, I stepped backward, into the hallway. Into our bedroom. Into the dark. I didn't cry. I just lay down and stared at the ceiling until morning began to stretch across it. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't tell who was watching who anymore. He didn't say anything the next morning. Just poured his cereal, checked his phone, and scrolled through something silently at the table while I stood by the sink rinsing dishes that weren't dirty. His knuckles were slightly red, as if he'd clenched too long or too tight. I didn't ask. The forecast warned of a storm rolling in by nightfall. Midwest weather, unpredictable, sudden, always theatrical. The wind had already picked up by noon, rattling the wind chimes by the neighbor's porch and tossing brittle leaves down the street. A tree branch scraped our bedroom window as I changed the sheets and pretended that routine made things okay. He was asleep early that night. His snoring sounded different, more like grinding than breathing. I lay beside him, wide awake, watching the dark ceiling pulse with shadows from wind-whipped trees outside. The window was open just a crack. Rain started hitting the sill. I didn't close it. Something pulled at me then. Not curiosity. Not desire. Something quieter, but heavier. Like gravity had shifted slightly and tilted me toward the wrong door. I got up. Stepped barefoot down the stairs. Avoided the one that creaked. Grabbed the porch key off the hook. The storm wasn't violent, just messy. Wet leaves stuck to my toes as I stepped off the porch and crossed the yard. The neighbor's house looked asleep too. But the porch light flicked on as I approached, just for a second. He opened the door before I could knock. His expression didn't change. He simply stepped aside. I walked in. There were candles scattered across the kitchen and into the hallway, flickering weakly against the storm-glazed windows. The power must have gone out. Or maybe he never turned the lights on. We didn't talk. We sat in the living room. The only sounds were the rain hitting the roof, and a faint melody from a small speaker in the corner playing something old, soft, and slow. We spent night together. At dawn, I walked back with shoes in hand. The grass was cold with dew, the air still thick with that humid tension that always follows rain. The porch light on our house was glowing again. The door was slightly ajar. He was asleep on the couch. Or he was pretending. I paused in the doorway. His hand dangled over the armrest, the TV remote on the carpet beside him. The screen was still on, flashing the weather channel, static, flicker, static again. A travel alert in red at the bottom. I didn't speak. I went upstairs. Showered. Changed. Stared at my reflection until my skin no longer looked like mine. At breakfast, I made eggs and toast and placed the plate in front of him. He didn't look up. Just picked up the fork and started eating. Storm didn't wake you? I asked. Nope. The knife scraped hard against the plate. Later that afternoon, I was mowing the front lawn, something I hadn't done in years. He'd always done it, but today, without asking, I dragged the mower out. The sun had returned. Blazing hot. The ground still damp. Halfway through, I hit something, a sprinkler head hidden in overgrown grass. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. A jet of water shot into the sky, spinning in wild arcs. I stood soaked, blinking through it, mouth open. He stepped outside with a beer in hand. Stood on the porch. Watching. He didn't laugh. He didn't help. The neighbor's car was gone. That evening, I found a small white envelope in the mailbox. No name. No return address. Just a folded note inside. Last night didn't happen unless you want it to. It was his handwriting. Neat. Spaced. On the back, there was something else. A sentence I hadn't seen in years. Not because it was hidden, but because it belonged to another time. I wish you'd just look at me again. But it was in my handwriting. I stared at it for a long time, unsure how it ended up in his hands. Then I remembered. Years ago, when things had first started to drift, not fall, not break, just drift, I'd written a letter to my husband. Not angry, not accusing. Just honest. I never gave it to him. I placed it in an old book on the shelf. Never told anyone. Never moved it again. I walked to the bookshelf upstairs. Pulled the book out. Its pages fluttered loosely. Empty. I went back to the window. The neighbor's house was dark again. No porch light this time. Just wind returning, gently. And silence. But I wasn't sure which silence belonged to who anymore. The note stayed in my robe pocket for days. Folded tight, like it might dissolve if exposed to air too long. I didn't ask him how he got my old letter. I didn't bring it up at all. But I read it again each night in secret, the back of his words staring into the front of mine, like they belonged in the same envelope all along. He didn't water his garden that week. His car didn't move. I didn't see him at all, not from the porch, not through the blinds, not even as a silhouette behind the curtains. Then, Thursday morning, my husband appeared in the kitchen with printed directions in hand and an unusual brightness in his voice. He'd booked us a weekend away. Just the two of us, he said. Back to the lake, like we used to. I nodded before I knew why. Maybe guilt. Maybe panic. Maybe I thought it was a test I was supposed to pass. He kissed my forehead, awkwardly, like someone copying from memory. He hadn't touched me in weeks. By Friday afternoon we were packed and driving north. 2 hours on I-71, mostly silence between stretches of cornfields and forgotten gas stations. He tapped the steering wheel at red lights and made small comments about the weather. I smiled, answered in one-word replies, and stared at the window reflection of someone I didn't recognize. The Airbnb was a log-sided cabin outside Sandusky, near a lake that smelled of algae and engine oil. There was a small dock and a kayak we wouldn't use. I carried the bags inside. He carried beer. He turned on the TV. I opened the curtains and watched geese fight near the waterline. That night he tried. Made dinner. Lit candles. Talked about when we first came here decades ago. He asked if I remembered the old diner with the jukebox. I nodded. But when he reached across the table and touched my hand, my body tensed. He noticed. He pulled back. Said nothing else. We finished dinner in silence. He went outside to sit on the porch and drink. I stayed inside and stared at the cutlery drawer for 20 straight minutes. Around 10 p.m., I told him I was going for a walk. The cold wrapped me immediately. I walked with no aim, following the road away from the cabin. I passed 3 more rentals, all with similar decks and similar fire pits. 2 were dark. One had a party, laughter, music, the scent of burning marshmallows. I reached the pier. It was empty except for an older man sitting at the edge, tossing crumbs into the lake. He looked over. I nodded. He offered me a thermos. Coffee, he said. Good kind. I accepted it, still warm. We didn't speak at first. Then I lied. I told him I was a widow. It came out too easily. Too flat. He didn't question it. Just nodded like that explained something. He told me he came here every year after his wife passed. He said they used to dance on this pier during the 4th of July fireworks. I told him that sounded beautiful. I didn't tell him anything else. We sat there for almost an hour. Then I stood and handed the cup back. Keep it, he said. I walked home slowly. My husband was inside watching a fishing documentary. You went out, he asked without looking away from the screen. I needed air. He turned to face me. Smells like campfire. It's cold out, I said. He nodded. You should have worn a jacket. I walked past him. Upstairs. Into the bathroom. Washed my face with cold water. The next morning, he slipped outside before breakfast. I heard the deck door creak. Then a yelp. A crash. I ran out to find him on the steps, holding his wrist and swearing under his breath. The wood was slick with frost. It wasn't broken, but it swelled fast. He refused to go to urgent care. I wrapped it with the first aid kit from the car. He said it would be fine. That he was just getting old. I made oatmeal. He didn't eat it. The silence between us wasn't the kind that held tension. It held emptiness. I stepped outside to clear my head. Pulled out my phone and typed a message to the neighbor. He slipped. Hurt his wrist. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I deleted it. Then retyped it. Then sent it. There was no reply. Hours passed. We drove home Sunday evening. No music. No talking. Just the endless sound of tires on pavement and the hum of wrong timing. When we pulled into the driveway, something was off. The neighbor's curtains were gone. No porch furniture. No flower pots. The mailbox had been removed. The side fence that was always cracked was now sealed with new panels. A sign staked in the lawn read, "For sale." The house looked like it had already forgotten him. No goodbye. No notice. Just gone. I stood frozen on the porch while my husband unlocked the door. He didn't comment on the empty house next door. Didn't seem to notice. I stared at the space where the garden used to be. The soil was fresh. No plants. Just a flat square of turned dirt. Inside, I unpacked slowly. Sat on the edge of the bed with clothes still folded in my lap. Opened the top drawer of my nightstand without reason. The letter was gone. Not the one in the robe pocket. The original one. The one I thought was missing. In its place, a peach pit. Dried, smooth, clean. Sitting neatly on a napkin. The same kind I bought that day at the market when it all began. The same kind that rolled to his foot. The same kind that started everything. And suddenly I understood. He didn't leave without saying goodbye. He'd been saying it for weeks. I just never listened. The peach pit stayed on my nightstand for 3 days. I didn't throw it out. I didn't touch it. Every night I looked at it before turning off the lamp, like it might reveal something else if I just stared hard enough. On the 4th morning, I wrapped it in the napkin and tucked it into the bottom drawer of the bathroom cabinet, underneath the old cotton balls and expired aspirin. Then I closed it and didn't open it again. The neighbor's house remained lifeless. Blinds drawn. For sale sign untouched. Every time I passed it, my chest tightened like I'd stepped into a room that had already forgotten I'd ever been there. By the end of the week, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called the real estate office. The receptionist asked if I wanted to schedule a showing. I said yes. She gave me a time, Tuesday, 10 a.m. I arrived 10 minutes early. The driveway still had faded oil stains in the exact place his car used to sit. The grass had been cut, but not recently. A dead leaf clung to the doorknob. The realtor was chipper, young, all blazer and lipstick and polished shoes. Charming little property, she said, unlocking the door. Fresh paint. New carpet in 2 bedrooms. I stepped inside. The air smelled unfamiliar, like they were trying to erase someone. But they hadn't finished. The floor still creaked the same near the pantry. The hook by the door still had a faint rust outline, like the key ring had never really left. "Do you know where the previous owner went?" I asked casually. She glanced at her clipboard. "Oh, just relocated. Milford, I think? Not far. Pretty town. Milford." I smiled politely. Nodded. Asked to see the backyard. Walked the perimeter. Said the price was a little high, but I'd think about it. I never planned to buy it. I just wanted to feel what it felt like to walk through that door and not belong. The next day, I drove to Milford. It was only 40 minutes, but it felt longer. The landscape changed subtly: more trees, more churches, fewer chain stores. I parked near the old train depot and walked 3 blocks until I found the address listed on the county property appraiser's site. It was a 1-story ranch with a long porch and wind chimes. Neutral siding. New gutters. Empty flower beds. I didn't knock. I stood on the opposite sidewalk for several minutes, watching. Nothing moved inside. Curtains stayed still. No car in the driveway. Eventually, a dog barked 3 houses down. I turned and walked away. Back home, I stripped the guest room. Took down the old curtains. Rolled up the rug. Cleared the books from the shelves and boxed them. My husband walked past the open door and paused. "Trying to fill the silence," he said. I didn't look up. "I guess." He nodded and kept walking. The next morning, I went grocery shopping. I bought his favorite cereal. Refilled the prescriptions. Picked up the usual things. Then I passed the snack aisle. There they were. His chips. Salt and vinegar, the thick kind with ridges. He always said they were too strong. I pretended I didn't like them. I put 2 bags in the cart. At home, I shoved them behind the oatmeal in the pantry. Deep enough that they couldn't be seen unless someone knew where to look. I told myself I'd never open them. Fall came quickly. The trees turned brittle almost overnight, their color like bruised apples. I cleaned the gutters. My husband raked the yard. We didn't talk about the neighbor's house again. Thanksgiving approached. He booked a table at a diner. Said he didn't want the hassle of cooking. Said it might be good to do something different. I agreed. I didn't care where we were. We arrived early, just after 4. The place was half full. The waitress wore a turkey pin on her apron and called everyone hon. I ordered tea. He asked for ham instead of turkey. The music overhead played Old Johnny Cash. I looked toward the front window while he unfolded his napkin. That's when I saw him. Sitting in a booth across the room. Facing the door. Smiling. Not alone. There was a woman beside him. Blonde, short hair, soft face. Her hand rested gently on his arm as she laughed. They shared a slice of pumpkin pie. For a second, my body froze. Not out of pain. Not jealousy. But recognition. I stared longer than I should have, until her face tilted just enough toward the light. Then it hit me. It was her. My childhood friend. Arizona. We hadn't spoken in 30 years. We lost contact after high school, drifted with time and distance like people always do. But I knew that face. I knew that scar above her eyebrow from falling off her bike when we were 9. I knew the way she tilted her head when she laughed. And now she was sitting with him. Smiling like nothing in the world had ever hurt her. I turned my face quickly and looked down at my napkin. "Everything all right?" my husband asked. I forced a smile. Just remembered something I forgot to do. He nodded and reached for the salt. The waitress came. Refilled our drinks. Asked about pie. I excused myself and went to the restroom. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the diner. My legs moved slower than they should have. Inside the mirror, my face looked like it had aged a decade in seconds. I splashed water on my cheeks. Dried them with the scratchy paper towel. When I stepped out, she was standing there. In the hallway. My old friend. We didn't hug. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I didn't know, until I did." Her voice trembled. I didn't reply. I couldn't. We just stood there, women made of too much history and too many questions, in a narrow space behind a diner in Ohio. And I realized I didn't know who had left who anymore. Or who had been left. We didn't speak about it on the drive home. Not about her. Not about him. Not about anything. The diner napkins still smelled faintly of cinnamon and grease, crumpled in the side compartment between us. The car ride was long, but not quiet. He hummed old songs on the radio. Tapped the steering wheel. Acted like the day hadn't cracked open something we couldn't name. He didn't ask why I stayed in the restroom so long. I didn't ask if he saw them too. That night, he watched TV from bed with the sound low. I sat on the floor, back against the dresser, holding a cup of tea I never drank. The news anchor mumbled something about road closures and holiday sales. I stared at my reflection in the screen between the flashes of weather alerts. At some point, I lay down on the carpet and closed my eyes. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up, the room dark, the TV off, the tea untouched, my back aching from the hard floor. The next morning, he made waffles. From scratch. That hadn't happened in years. He even sprinkled powdered sugar on top like I used to like it. I ate one bite, said I was full, and left the plate half-finished. He didn't press. Just cleared the table and started loading the dishwasher like we hadn't just collided with ghosts. I needed space. So I drove. No GPS. No direction. I just followed whichever road seemed less familiar. Past leafless trees, faded barns, gas stations with flickering signs. I didn't know where I was going until I was already parked. The lake. I walked toward the water. It was half frozen, the kind of thin ice that cracked like paper if you stared too hard. A few geese wandered around, feathers puffed against the wind. I sat on a bench and watched the sky reflect off the cracked surface. It was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there long enough that my hands went numb. Back home, the house was still. He was asleep on the couch again. The remote on the floor. A show looping softly on mute. I stepped over him, made tea, and climbed the stairs. I opened my laptop. For hours, I stared at old photos. Not ours. Not family ones. Just images I'd saved over the years. Of oceans, airports, empty bookstores. Places I never went. Places I thought I might someday. Then I opened the message history. His name was still there. The thread still intact. I hovered over it, then opened it. No new messages. No responses. But they were all still there, mine. The first one, "Thanks again for the help." Then, "You mow in straight lines." That's rare. Then, later, "I don't remember the last time I laughed that hard." I kept scrolling. To the message I never sent, "If I leave, will you wait for me?" It had been sitting in draft for weeks. Maybe longer. I stared at it. Then deleted it. line by line. As if it had never existed at all. Then I deleted the entire thread. Every word. Every pause. Every space. Gone. That night, I lay in bed while he snored beside me. I watched the ceiling again, same crack running diagonally like a scar we never fixed. I counted my breaths. I listened to the wind. I imagined what her voice must sound like now, after 30 years and all those miles. The next morning, I woke to the smell of burnt toast. He was in the kitchen, still in his robe, scraping blackened crumbs into the sink. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine." He held up a bag. They were out of our usual bread. I nodded. We didn't eat. Instead, we cleaned the house. The entire house. Windows, baseboards, closets. As if trying to erase something neither of us could name. Later, he sat on the edge of the guest bed, looking around the room like he didn't remember when we'd last used it. "You know," he said slowly, "I used to imagine this would be an art room." I folded a blanket. "Why didn't it become one?" He shrugged. "Guess I waited too long." I didn't respond. The sun started fading. I walked outside to the backyard. The fence was still broken. The same one he used to promise to fix every spring. I stared at the gap where his yard used to be. Where he used to be. The leaves had piled high. A squirrel darted through. I bent down to pick up a stick. Snapped it in half. Then again. Again. Until all I held was splinters. Inside the mailbox was a postcard. No return address. No handwriting, except 4 words. "Still watering your side." Dated 2 weeks ago. I stared at the ink until it blurred. Then I turned around. Walked to his old house. The new owners were outside. Raking. Laughing. A couple, maybe in their 40s. The kind that still kissed in public and dressed alike without trying to. They waved. I smiled tightly and waved back. The garden was empty. Completely empty. No flowers. No vegetables. Just dirt. But when I returned to my own yard, I stopped short. There were blossoms. Soft. Pale. Dozens of them. I hadn't planted anything. Not that year. Not the year before. But there they were, across the mulch, beside the walkway, beneath the broken fence line. Things I never asked for, growing anyway. I stepped toward the porch. Opened the mailbox again. A small ring of keys sat inside. No note. Just keys. And a folded napkin. My handwriting. "I left before you did." Before I could breathe, before I could think, I heard a sound behind me. I turned. He stood there. Suitcase in hand. My husband. His face unreadable. And then he said, "I know where those keys go." He stood motionless, suitcase at his side, eyes on the keys in my hand like they were something fragile, dangerous, or both. I didn't speak. Neither did he. The silence that stretched between us wasn't awkward, it was final. Tightly wound. Like something had already happened and we'd arrived too late to change it. I looked at the keys again. They were cold. Clean. Ordinary. Just metal, and yet, heavier than they should have been. "You've been there, haven't you?" he said. My mouth opened, then closed. I couldn't lie. Not now. Maybe not ever again. "I went once," I answered. He nodded like he'd expected it. Then he set the suitcase down on the porch, not gently, not harshly, just deliberately. I know where those keys go, he repeated, and this time it wasn't a question. The air felt too thin. Like the world had stopped refilling it. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back inside the house. I stood alone, on the steps, the keys clenched in my palm, the weight of everything pressing down on my shoulders, not just what I'd done, but what I hadn't. All the silences I let stretched too long. All the doors I left cracked open. I didn't follow him. Instead, I turned toward the neighbor's old yard. It was quiet. Peaceful, even. The last of the fall leaves had gathered in soft drifts along the fence line. The house, now occupied by strangers, looked unfamiliar, different window dressings, a pumpkin by the door, wind chimes that didn't belong. And yet, I stepped through the gap in the fence anyway. Past the flower bed he once tended. Past the cracked stone he used to trip over. I paused by the gate. Then turned back. Our house looked smaller from here. Dimmer. I walked around to the back, not to look in the windows, not to linger near memories, but to be somewhere no one would expect me. I sat down by the fence. On the ground. My knees pulled up, arms around them, like a child hiding during a storm. And I stayed there until the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the cold started crawling into my sleeves. That night, neither of us spoke. He slept in the bedroom. I stayed on the couch. No one asked questions. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I packed a bag. Not a suitcase, just a small canvas tote. Sweater, notebook, wallet, the napkin with my handwriting still pressed flat inside. The postcard too. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. A deliberate echo. I walked 3 blocks before I saw it. A for rent sign in a small upstairs unit on Mayfield Street. The building was old. The kind of place with creaky stairs and radiators that hiss in winter. I didn't call the number. I just stood there for a while, long enough for someone on the second floor to peek out and close their blinds. That afternoon, I went to the park. The same one where I first fell. Where everything started. It was quiet now. The skating path empty. Leaves skittered along the pavement. I walked the curve where my ankle had twisted, placed my foot in the same spot, like returning to the scene of a silent crime. I sat on the nearest bench and watched the wind rearrange the world. Later, I returned home. Not out of duty. Not out of fear. Just because. The house was still. The porch light was off. The blinds closed. Inside, he was gone. His clothes. His razor. His books. The suitcase was not by the door. In its place, a note taped to the fridge. Just a sticky note. Wasn't about him. Wasn't even about us. Nothing else. I sat on the kitchen floor with the keys still gone and the silence growing again, only this time it wasn't empty, it was full of things I hadn't asked, hadn't said, hadn't faced. I didn't know where he'd gone. I didn't even know if he was coming back. But I did know this. The peach pit was gone from the bathroom drawer. The drawer had been closed. Left untouched for days. But now it was empty. No note. No message. Just absence. That night, I turned off all the lights. I opened the front window and let the wind come through. I lay on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to every creak, every shift of the wood, every distant car door slamming shut. Until I heard it. Steps on the porch. Soft. Familiar. I sat up. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. Only a bag. Paper. Folded at the top. Inside, 3 things. A bag of salt and vinegar chips. A vinyl copy of Rumors. And the peach pit. Still dry. Still whole. And wrapped in a napkin. But not the napkin I'd written on. This one had only 4 words scribbled across it. You never really left. And somewhere deep inside me, something broke, not from pain, not from regret, but from the realization that endings don't always wait for permission. Sometimes, they just arrive.